Hi, welcome to Conversations with Jackie and Bobby Angel. I'm Bobby Angel, one of your hosts. Thank you for listening. Before I get to our awesome guest today, a quick thank you to all of those who have generously donated for our Patreon. You guys are helping us keep these shows going. This show, as well as Jackie's standalone Memorized Scripture podcast. There's a few different tiers to giving. You'll get some bonus features. You'll get early access. You'll get periodic webinars from Jackie and I. And if you feel called, pray about it, and we'd love to partner with you in the work ahead. Today, I am honored to have Father Mark Mary Ames, who is a Franciscan Friar of the Renewal. He's the Director of Communications and Priestly Studies for the CFRs, and the author of a few books, including the one we're going to be mostly talking about today, The Father, 30 Meditations to Draw You into the Heart of God. His two great loves are the Eucharist and the confessional, and he's dedicated his life to bringing both to God's people and God's people to both. Father Mark Mary, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Bobby, good to connect with you again. And thanks for having me on the show here.
Yeah, we've done parallel ministries on Ascension. You've made a cameo in at least one of our videos way back when we lived in Anaheim, or you grew up in Southern California, right?
Yeah, Anaheim, exactly.
And so the all boys school I used to work at, we had Father Augustino come out and speak, who's another Franciscan friar, and we showed the basketball YouTube video, like the Renewal in Motion. You remember that
hmm
little
I
blast from
do
the
remember
past?
that. That was kind of what got me started in all this stuff.
Yeah, and you're featured. You're spinning the basketball in slow motion on your finger. You weren't spinning it in slow motion. The video was
Yeah.
in slow motion. But I mean, it's the Friars doing all sorts of trick shots and jumping off trampolines and just like it was a school of 900 boys, and we showed them this video, and they were just going nuts. And I was like, this is like a vocations call right here.
Well, yeah, thanks for putting it to good use. Again, yeah, that was kind of, I was the friar, if you will, behind that kind of weird or out of the box idea. But yeah, it worked. It worked for some of what we were hoping for. So, but it also works because people like you show it to the right people.
Yeah, yeah. So what are you up to lately? I know you are here, there, and everywhere, it seems. So what does God have you up to as of late?
Yeah, I'm a Franciscan Friar of the Renewal. I think your audience maybe knows who they are, but we all kind of end up wearing a lot of hats. And so my main hats are so I'm the director of priestly studies. So I'm in charge of the CFR seminarians and the local servant, which means it's kind of like the superior. So I'm the guy kind of in charge of the house for seminarians. And then a big part of my work is doing spiritual direction for the Dawson seminarians. So right now I'm recording at St. Joseph Seminary, which is where I have an office and I work. And then I continue to run our communication stuff. And so that's kind of for the friars in general, behind the scenes, but also with Ascension Presents, writing our podcast, Poco podcast, stuff like that.
I have so many people who love Poco. I have so many people in my life that like, did you hear the latest episode? Did you hear when Father, Mark said this or that? Like, so that show is along with all the Ascension stuff. I just feel like that show is meeting a real need. Like, how did that show start?
Yeah, it's actually funny. Is seemed like a good fit for our community. And I had a couple of guys. There's three guys who were three of the friars who were open to doing it. It's going to be this thing kind of like a father-son type of thing. And then I had a benefactor reach out who donated, the podcast equipment, and we had the stuff. And I went to the guys and say, hey, like, when do you want to get set up? And they basically responded, oh, we didn't know you were serious about that. And so I ended up having podcast equipment and no one to do it. So I asked Father Innocent and Father Angelus, who are they're tw triplets technically, but they're twin brothers within the friars, and if they'd give it a shot. And so that's how it ended up being the three of us, and the way it kind of took the form and the direction it took, which I do feel super providential because it would have been a totally different thing with totally different friars. Um, but it did seem like God had a plan in the midst of it all.
When it comes to vocation, do you mind giving us a quick bird's eye view of how did you feel called to be a priest? How did you specifically feel called to be a Franciscan? Is it something you knew from childhood? Is it something that God really surprised you? years into your journey?
Yeah, I would say it was a big surprise and some in a certain sense somewhat unique. I did grow up with like a really good family, and I was generally a good kid, raised Catholic. And so now, the more I know, more I know that that's kind of the good soil of kind of a vocation and things like that. But Franciscans weren't on my radar. The priesthood wasn't on my radar. And then freshman year of college, I went to Loyola Marymount University, which is a Jesuit university, just kind of in LA. And that's where I had my like I really believe it needs to affect my whole life moment. And that was just a particular grace that the Lord gave me, kind of just very uniquely. And then I heard somebody speaking about Mother Teresa, and again, I was just kind of it was kind of like these first two are really like lightning bolt moments where I just felt this desire that I'm made to give my life to the poorest of the poor, and nothing else would satisfy. And that's kind of out of nowhere. And so then I was looking for a place where, and then I slowly learned more about the sacraments, and particularly the Eucharist and confessional, and the desire to be a priest started to kind of rise. So I was looking for a place I can work with the poor, um, and be a priest. And it was actually at In-N-Out Burger down in Anaheim Hills, where it was after a young adult meeting. A guy mentioned there's this group of Franciscans in New York who are hardcore and sleep on the ground. And I was like 19 at the time, my 19-year-old sensibilities, it was the most all in for Jesus thing I'd heard about. So I looked them up, read our constitutions. And from there, it was just like, if this is real, this is everything I'm looking for. And so that all happened within like 4 to 6 months. Um, and it was just a real experience of God's sort of choice and call, and a really unique grace and gift from him to me.
God speaks through In-N-Out.
God speaks through In-N-Out and in In-N-Out.
Yeah, God's food next to Chick-fil-A. Was your family supportive? Were they like, whoa, this is out of left field? Because a lot of vocations, it comes, yeah, back to the family. Is the family on board? Are they supportive? Are they like, heck no, someone else's kid is going to do it, not you?
Yeah, again, this is like it was pretty out of nowhere, and I was pretty young, and it moved quickly. So my parents were supportive, and they're going to be supportive in general. The language from my dad was, this isn't the path I would have chosen for you, but I'm going to support you. And then kind of my mom was a little just the cautionary, like, hey, there's no hurry. And I do think that the component of the whole like externals of this the Franciscan Friars, the Renewal, like all of this feels like a little bit much, and it could feel a little bit radical or a little bit culty. And so I think there was and it was just so foreign to what we would experience growing up. So I do think there were some reservations about that. But when they came and visited and met all the guys, and you see people are healthy and normal and themselves, that kind of took care of all of those concerns. And quickly, I think it became more than just we're going to support you in what you do, kind of no matter what. To like, no, like we actually believe in this for you as well.
Mhm. Jackie and I have been very blessed by the CFRs and knowing them and just even running in different circles like Reform Wellness with Jackie Mulligan, who we had as one of the earliest guests on the show. I know she works with you guys closely and you with her. Dr. Greg Bottaro at the Catholic Psych Institute. I was in seminary with a guy who was with the CFRs, but then felt called to diocesan life. And we were kind of the odd couple. He's a very extroverted guy from the Dominican Republic, and I'm much more of a stoic Ron Swanson guy. So on paper, we didn't get along, but we ended up being really close. And he would hang his gray habit on the wall of his dorm, and he would say, "Brother, I will die in gray." Like you guys, and the ladies, like the women who are the not friars, they're sisters,
Yeah.
are also are just such a gift to the church, and it is radical. It is like literally like to the roots when you think of what St. Francis did and how he lived, and there's an attractiveness to that countercultural example, even if it's a bit like, well, not me, someone else should do it. It's like, well, but who?
hmm Yeah, and and it's a funny thing discerning a vocation like this and even being in it is there's just a part where you sometimes you kind of are outside of it and you look in, just looking at the mirror, like, is this really my life? Like it's just so It's just so different. But I just, throughout the experience of discernment and then final vows and all that, I just can't, I just love it. I'm just made for it, and it fills my heart. And I wouldn't have guessed this was where my life was going to go, but I just can't deny the fact that I love it and continue to be blessed in the midst of it.
And how God keeps changing it up. Like just because you've arrived, there's like different missions, different tasks, and
Oh
those
yeah.
those change, and it's like not my comfort zone, but you keep saying yes to it.
Yeah. There's definitely levels to it and a depth to it that the Lord wants to go that um yeah, I didn't know about when I first entered. But it's the ongoing sort of life of conversion and following of Christ. Like the whole renewal concept of the CFRs is beginning with our own daily personal renewal.
Mm. I wanted to talk to you today about your latest book, which is The Father, 30 Meditations to Draw You into the Heart of God. And so Ascension didn't put me up to this. I read this a few months ago, prayed through it because it's designed as like a personal do-it-yourself retreat. And I was really moved. And by the end of it, I felt called to to reach out and say, "Hey, would you want to do a conversation here for the podcast and just break it down a bit?" Like, and I guess to start, what prompted you to write this book in particular?
Yeah, this book in particular has been it's kind of started with my own experience with the Lord and what he's been doing in my own heart, both in drawing me to the Father, but also some of my own experiences now of spiritual fatherhood. And yeah, there's just like I think just more and more the importance of God as Father and his goodness. Um Particularly, I think I mean it's not new. It's part of the sort of the patrimony of the church forever. Um but there was a new experience of it, and I do think it's the right paradigm. There's a reason that when Jesus teaches us to pray, he says to us, our Father. And what does the Holy Spirit cry out in us? He cries out in us, Abba, Father. Like we're made for a relationship with the Father, who's also God the Father, who's the perfect Father. um but also just more and more, it's there's a lot of broken families and a lot of father wounds and a lot of desires for a father who's faithful and true and steady and good. And I really have felt called just to remind people and to help them hopefully come to experience in their own lives that like these things that you desire. I'm using the language like they're not just desires, they're promises, and they're promises fulfilled in God the Father, and to bring this hope and good news in it. And then the approach of the book is using earthly fathers as paradigms into and the experiences of earthly fathers, both biological and spiritual, as a way of kind of piercing a little bit of what can be an abstraction, a way of kind of understanding and yeah, understanding like God's fatherhood and the characteristics of God the Father. And a lot of started on trajectory when I first heard the story. That's actually the last chapter in the book of a father who ends up laying down his life to save his son with Down syndrome in just a really kind of heroic way, and just like how much that reveals to us the heart of God as well, and him coming to save us. And so it's just been a journey that kind of culminated in some ways with this book.
And it's so needed. And it was something that was in the water. I felt like this last Lent, Easter. I forget when the book was published, but I heard a lot of people reading it and talking to me about it or the insights they were getting from reading it.
Mhm.
And so that's when I said, okay, I need to read it. And for myself, because each day, each chapter, it starts with the account of an earthly father at very ordinary examples. And then it goes to God the Father. And what does scripture reveal about him? What does tradition reveal about him? And so how earthly fatherhood at its best can reveal the face of God and God's love for us, and how that is so obscured in this day and age. How there are so many absent fathers. There's so many emotionally absent fathers, or fathers who have somehow in some way maybe made their love contingent. Like you've got to get straight A's to get my attention. You've got to succeed. You've got to achieve. And so we naturally project that onto God the Father. Like I've got to do so many rosaries. I've got to do so many. I can't screw up. God's always waiting to catch me. And so to redeem that, and a lot of people I'm working with, that's some of the preliminary work is how do you conceive of God the Father? If you let's start with do you believe in God? Like we all have that self-sufficient, I want to do it on my own part. Like, but then that we're all in the different stages in the journey of okay, now I believe in God, but how are you imagining God? Is he an absent father? Is he I gotta earn his attention or his love? So and there one of the retreats I ran at the high school I worked was like one of the talks they gave was the misconceptions of God and how we can think God is Santa Claus, God is a policeman out to get me, God is a judge, always angry at me. And let's pick those apart. Is that really who God is? Or in my own story, my wounds, is that who I have imagined God to be?
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate just kind of because it certainly is the experience we can have with our own earthly fathers. But also there's just so many, if you will, father type of figures, coaches, teachers, etc. And a lot of kind of the culture and the society we're in, it is very performative and performance based. And then there's a lot of space for celebrating victories, but um not a lot of just communication or sort of modeling or permission, like guidance on what to do with like your weakness and your failings, you know. And so like one of the chapters I feel strongest about is there's the story of the young girl who's in and out of various foster homes. She's adopted, and she's about 8 years old, and one day she basically goes to her adoptive dad and is saying, like, I just I'm another child around here. I know it's a lot of work. I know it costs a lot. And so she's like pulls out like $11 from her pocket and says, I've been saving this just to help out a little bit. And this whole idea of and the father says like, no, 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 like we're not going to do that. You're not going to pay rent. Like I love you. This is your home. This is your forever home. I just need you to be a little girl and to laugh and to play and to make mistakes and all that. And I just think that this is something that's pretty deep in a lot of us, is this idea of needing to pay rent in society, but also needing to pay rent to God. And a lot of the things that we can do come from this place of like, yeah, paying rent to our Father's house, and God as sort of landlord is one of these disfigured images that we have to work through. Um, but also on the other side, there's like we can struggle with the idea of a good God like saying no and
Mm.
setting boundaries and allowing hard things to happen. And that's where I also think the father is so important, because as your own experience as a dad, like you have to teach, you have to have rules, you have to have discipline. Like they're not arbitrary. They're of your child, but also you need to teach your child and mature your child. And eventually your child's going to have to be able to do hard things, and you need to form that in them as well. And so I think and that's why I just think the Father, and there's a reason that God reveals himself as Father. And I just think it is the perfect sort of integration of God.
One of the chapters you talked about being jumped on by your niece or nephews, and at some point you're like, all right, that's enough, and I'm tired. And your is it your like your brother, like who's the dad, is like or no, sorry, you were
It was
thinking
it
of
was my dad to me,
yeah,
who was
you're
like never got tired.
which I read that. I'm like, that's impossible because I'm feeling like an old
Okay.
man. I'm like, all right, enough. I need a chiropractor. I need a break.
Yeah.
But that to me was a mirror of like, okay, they just want me to be a horse. Like I can endure a little bit more. My kids want me to be with them. That's not going to be there forever because all of our kids at the moment are like 9 and under. So we have little people, little problems.
Mhm.
And that like be with me, delight in me, like delight in this thing I drew. And like to whatever work I got to get done, whatever checklist, to put that aside and say, okay, be with my kids. Also challenge them. I love what you said there. Of it's about teaching empathy. It's about helping them access what they're feeling and working through, but also you can do hard things. And that it's the masculine genius of you can climb a little higher. Like you got this. Like explore, step out. I think there's the God the Father delights in that. Like that we sometimes feel like we need everything mapped out before I can take a step. And that could be vocation, that could be dating, that could be career. And God is the Father who's like, I gave you free will, I gave you autonomy, I'm with you.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it honors me when you trust me enough to step out.
Yeah.
And that's a process to get through. It's not always an easy thing to say, oh, okay, yeah, I'll trust now. It's like there's fears. What if God
Yeah.
doesn't come through? You know?
Yeah. And I do think there's an order to this that's obvious in the natural order that I think is also true in the spiritual, right? Is like with your kids at the beginning, like you just love them, delight in them, take care of them. They don't have any responsibilities, they can't do anything. Like you just the we come into this world totally dependent and poor and but also like meant to be loved and received and all that sort of place in there. And so I do think like and then later on we grow maturity and responsibility and no longer just little people with little problems. We become big people with like real problems and a need to eventually do hard things. And the hard things I'm talking of here aren't like ice baths, necessarily. It's like any vocation fully entered into, like it's going to be difficult to be a dad, to be a husband, to be a wife, to be a mother, to be single and to be continually given. Like if we want these things, we're going to have to be able to persevere in doing something hard. But spiritually, I think what we can get in trouble with is with our, especially, I think I get it where it comes from, but there can be an emphasis on doing hard things for God at the very beginning of our spiritual lives as a sign of our like love and fidelity and reverence, etc. Um, which it can just be a little bit coming from this paying rent type of like performance mentality if it's not founded upon knowing like um the absolute and total love uh of the Father that we're delighted in, that we have like we're loved even if we're weak, all that kind of stuff. And I do think that as a child is loved very poor and then they kind of grow into maturity and giving themselves away. I think there's also like a bit of a flow of that's supposed to be there in the spiritual life.
Yeah, that's the trust,
Yeah.
like the slow buildup of trust.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
like when the kids want to jump off the stairs and there's a trust that I will catch them. And I pray to God, like there's all sorts of dad wins and dad fails on the internet. And my heart always skips a beat. But it's that abandonment. And it's I delight in it.
Hmm.
I tell guys like fatherhood is the most exhausting and beautiful thing God will ever call you to.
Yeah.
Because it has forced me to grow in ways. It's forced me to confront my own selfishness and my own stuff. Like I say this jokingly, but not really. Like I don't think I ever really confessed anger before I became a dad. Like it just like unlocks something of like it's you can't control them.
Yeah.
You can guide, you can, especially in the early years, there's just a lot of like your training. Like don't eat sand, don't put your hand in the toilet. Like um but then like what am I reacting to within me that is getting me upset?
Hmm.
Like oh, I'm thinking, I'm projecting. Other people think I'm a crappy dad because my kid is having a meltdown. And I'm getting flustered, I'm getting angry, and it's the kid's just overwhelmed. The kid is flooded with whatever they're feeling. They didn't get the right color spoon they wanted. And so I've thank God for his mercy, because as the years have gone on, I've gotten a little bit better, or at least a little bit more patient of what's going on inside me as a dad. Like Lord, help me to reflect you as best as I can. And even just the humility of like original sin, like no dad is perfect. Like the best of dads are still not God. And that's okay. Like we're all going to screw up.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course the good news is that and I think it's just so important is that yeah, even the best of dads are still going to be limited. Um but just that we do have a perfect father in heaven. And I felt pretty strong about or convicted of starting the book with the story of Saint Francis, because Saint Francis, right? Um, we you know we just talk about him because of his poverty or the leper or the birds or whatever, um but on the short version of it, right, is Saint Francis is basically like publicly kind of like cut off by his dad, like his dad who like imprisoned him, who threatened him, who beat him, then publicly disowns him to the bishop. And this is and so I really do. So this is like it's talking about father wounds. This is like a profound father wound, right? This public disownment by your dad in a small town, basically. Um, but that I do believe that Saint Francis like responded to this in his pursuit of Jesus, um, and knowing that Jesus reveals to him like the perfect father, and just that they're like, because my what I want to push through is I think there can be a doubt that God's fatherhood actually means anything or matters. Like it can feel abstract and remote, but no, it is real and it is accessible and it does have the power to transform and to heal. Um, and but we know the perfect love of the Father through responding to this invitation of Jesus, come follow me. Ultimately, what Francis does in pursuit of a radical following of Christ, and that's ultimately the way to experiencing these promises fulfilled.
What do you say to someone who might be struggling with like getting there? Like maybe intellectually, I understand God is a loving father. I can trust him, but at the heart level, or like there's still like I don't know though, like just not for me. Like or my life, I haven't seen it. Like how do you help someone in that place?
Yeah, and the details, the specifics do matter so much. But so it would be like my response would be to ask you a bunch more questions to hear your
Sure.
story and what's going on, But for the sake of where we're at, I think, one defense mechanism that I'm becoming more aware of that people have is if you didn't really experience a certain thing as a child, one way we seem to respond to that is by sort of like kind of closing that door of our heart and labeling it as like unnecessary or unimportant. And so like if so some people can do this. It's like, okay, I didn't really have a lot of encouragement or somebody really celebrated me or told me that they loved me or told me that I was good. But it's like I don't really need that. And we kind of go about life just closing that door and numbing that part of our heart. And so if I ask you, like, oh, what do you think about God the Father? You might experience like, well, it doesn't really seem like it's for me. Like it seems maybe a little bit of fluff or sentimentality. It's like, well, I would just encourage like a reflection. Like, is there a part of your heart there that you've kind of closed the door on? Is there something there that we can look at that you can bring to the Lord in prayer? Um, but also, I think the Lord does have each of us on a unique journey. So if right now you're in a phase where you're really focused on Christ and who he is and what he's doing, and maybe the Father isn't sort of the most important part of your spirituality right now, like, okay, that's okay. Or maybe you're in a time with the Holy Spirit or with Our Lady. That's okay. I mean, just be on the journey. But also, yeah, I do think that, again, like I said, there's a reason that Jesus teaches us to pray our Father, and the Holy Spirit cries out within us, Abba, Father.
So Father Mark, one of the chapters in the book, it talked to, there's a lot of just the gratuitousness of God. Like he's not counting the cost. He's not counting the hours. He's not like, what's the ROI on this relationship? As you
Right.
said, like, do I feel like I have to pay rent, or do I feel like God's keeping a tally of how many times I've been to confession or how many? You shared the story, and so you shared the story of a girl who went off to college. She was getting really homesick, and her dad on a phone call could tell she wasn't doing well. And so he proceeds to drive 2 hours to her college. He picks up flowers and a stuffed panda bear on the way and visits with her, um, and says, I just want you to know I'm so proud of you. I love you so much. I know you're stressed out and you have to study, so I'm not going to take up much of your time. I just wanted to come and wanted you to know I'm here for you. I'm always thinking of you and I'm proud of you. And after a few minutes together. Her father hugged her and drove home, 2 hours home. And I'm walking with a few college age students at the moment who read this book. And the response from them was, my dad would never do that. Like they're reading it and it's raising all sorts of different stuff and questions. And it's been really good to like talk about as we've been walking together. And that heartbreaking sense though of like, oh, my own dad would never do that. And processing that together. And I've been blessed with parents who they did do that. Like literally, like I was collapsed my third year of seminary from an intestinal issue, and my parents drove from one coast of Florida to the other to meet me in that agony. And but like I said, it's heartbreaking to know like we've all got different experiences of fatherhood.
Yeah.
And yeah, to also say like, okay, maybe I don't know, like what do you say to someone who's trying to process that? Like my experience of fatherhood, how like my dad, my experience with men has not, yeah, bared witness to like
Hmm.
I don't have much hope. And I know that's, if you were counseling one-on-one, there'd be 13 questions
Right.
to go from here,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know, like that stood out with me.
Yep.
And yeah.
Yeah. And I'll start one place and then come to it, right? Because there's another true story in the book of, a young lady whose mom tells her never expect anything good from a man. And her dad just uh basically he had to pick her up on like a 20-minute drive. And before getting into the house, he tells her like never ask me to do this again.
Yeah.
And even when she has her starts to have her conversion, she could only really talk to Mary because Jesus and the Father were masculine, right? And but she did end up having the healing process. So all of that is just so real. And regarding that first story, and this is right, there is a space that's maybe not this conversation of just like receiving somebody and loving them as they reveal their hurt. And that's like a really important that would be my first response. But also like the point of this why a point of this book, if you will, is that actually like all of these things your father, like your heavenly father actually has done for you and is continuing to do. And we know that the earthly father has limited and fallen in so many ways. Um, but you are being loved in this way. And so for example, right, part of the hermeneutic, the understanding of right, certainly God the Father does not become incarnate, right? Okay. But Jesus reveals to us the Father. And in Jesus coming to us, he reveals to us the heart and the work of the Father as well. Is that Jesus did become man in pursuit of us, and that he remains in the tabernacle, in the most holy Eucharist, just waiting for us. And it's almost like that dad was just sort of like he drove out to the school and then he just spent the rest of his life just like sitting in the parking lot, just waiting, hoping like to wave and have a few 10-minute conversation with his daughter. And that's how he spent his whole life. Like Jesus has come to us. Um, God has taken an initiative and has pursued us and pursued you and pursued each of the young men or the young women that you work with. And he continues to wait in this like sort of gratuitous, um, over the top way, just hoping for us to come visit. And I think that's part of really with that story and a lot of my really what deeply moves my heart, I think, is just this lie that God is disinterested or that he's kind of remote and just sort of watching. And if we come to him, great. But if not, he'll be okay. But that God is viscerally invested in our lives and that he takes the first step and pursues us. And right, because even with something like the confessional or the tabernacle, visiting the Blessed Sacrament, you can have the lived experience of I get into my car, I make the plan, I go there, and we can miss the fact that Jesus is there waiting and has been waiting for 2,000 years, and that he came, though he was in the form of God, he became man in pursuit of us, and just to help open our eyes again to the great love and the great mystery of his love for us that is being given to each of us today.
We hear so much about the loneliness epidemic, the
Yeah.
anxiety in this generation, and I would say a lot of it stems from a spiritual void and a sense of we've gone from God is kind of like a deist idea of God. He's just a clockmaker at the end of the universe, to now with just where the culture is, this overarching message of like, yeah, there's no real God. But then downstream from that, well, what am I going to do with my life? Like, is there's no direction? Like, does no one really care? And if my earthly, examples are all over the place, then of course there's going to be anxiety. There's going to be
Mhm.
loneliness and frustration and like just this, like you said, like the best of dads also know like are firm, like loving and firm, and I want the best for you, and I'm giving you direction, and I want to encourage you to go do it. And how reclaiming a real sense of God's fatherhood that is presence, that is in the here and now, like in the person of Jesus, in every tabernacle around the world. Like
Mhm.
the there's the solution. It's not, there's no quick fix, I guess.
Yeah.
What would you say to young men, any young men who are listening, who are also maybe had varying experiences of fatherhood, but feel called to either, marriage or priesthood, they don't really know, but like, what would you say to encourage men to just be open to being like a dad, like a fatherhood, even if our examples weren't the best?
Yeah, I do. I really believe this is and I'll use it for men and women, but that I do believe that the fullness of life, like what we're made for, the fullness of the maturity of a man is to develop a father's heart, and for a woman, a mother's heart. And that doesn't necessarily have to be linked to biological children, but there is this, and I really do actually almost like the image of the mustard seed. It's the smallest seed that's planted that becomes this large bush, and then other sort of whatever, like animals and birds can make their home in it. Like that fully grown and developed sort of mustard seed that's become this tree or whatever is like the example of a father's heart, where if you're just kind of living for yourself, your capacity for joy is like table of one. Like if I'm happy, if I'm good, if I'm experiencing a good thing, then like then there's one degree of happiness or one cup of happiness. But I do believe that developing a father's heart creates now like, and that's part of your experience as a dad. Like I'm more happy in, if you will, in like the joy and the celebration, the achievement of my kids than even myself. And my happiness now isn't just happiness for one, it's happiness for all of these. And as a like a spiritual father, as a priest, that's also real and true and the people that the Lord gives to me. And so I do think we're made for it. I do think we're made to father. I do think we're made to love. I do think we're made to do all the things that go with fathering, and that like creating space, being strong, being safe, providing, working hard, sacrificing, that all of these are actually like what abundant life looks like. And there can be some fear. There's definitely going to be a lot of fear and things to work through, but it's worth working through. And I just more and more my I'm just coming up on my sixth. I already just finished my sixth anniversary of priesthood, and it's just become very clear. Like I don't care about my birthday. I don't really even care about like my feast day. We have a feast day, but I'm deeply moved by the anniversary of my priesthood because it's given me this gift of many things, but including spiritual fatherhood. And it's just the best, and it's a treasure that I didn't know existed. And so I just encourage everybody to be bold, to persevere, but to also go, step by step.
It's about being a gift
Yeah.
and stepping out of ourselves, and unless that seed dies and like it's not going to bear new life, and to get over ourselves, which isn't always fun. And a friend of mine long ago said, the best priests would have been great dads, and the best dads, would have been great priests, because it's the same stuff as a man that it
Yep.
takes to be generous to. And so that was my prayer, was I was discerning, was like, Lord, I want to be a father. I just help me figure out where that's going to go. And you said earlier too, like there's also the mosaic of fatherhood, of coaches and teachers and volunteers. And so maybe you're not in a place of like that next step vocationally, but certainly we can get involved in little ways that make a difference, that get us outside of our heads, get us interacting with kids that need more good, holy, masculine examples.
Yeah, 1000%, 100% on that. Yeah.
Okay, Father Mark, we could keep going, but let's cap it there. Do you have any more books you're working on? Are you allowed to talk about, or are you like no writing for a while?
No, I do have another one I'm working on the Beatitudes. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but I wasn't told not to talk about it. But that's with Ascension as well. I don't know what it'll be called or when it'll officially come out, but I do know that I have a good amount of work to do on it in this next 2 weeks. But yeah, I'm excited about that one as well.
Yeah, thank you for your yes in all ways, and like in media and writing. It's blessing a lot of people. So people can go check out the Poco podcast, which we'll link below, as well as you and the other brothers, the Ascension channel. Anywhere else you'd like to send people to support your mission with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal?
Yeah, I think one of our priests, Father Isaiah, who his music name continues to be Brother Isaiah, has a new album that's just coming out. So checking that out on Spotify would be cool. And then, yeah, the book is at ascensionpress.com/the Father if you want to check out the book.
Yeah, we'll link that below. Father Mark Mary, thank you so much for your time, man.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Really good to connect with you, man.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next episode.